strengthening public finance management system for many years. I think there has only been in the last few years a real awareness of the need to strengthen the systems to be able to respond to disasters, to be able to function well after disasters, and to be able to provide timely, responsive services to citizens and to speed recovery. Many of those things have been focused on budget planning, legislation, perhaps IT resilience, and yet public procurement systems are also a key part of what we've been doing, not just because of the volume of public spending, but also the critical nature in which governments need to be able to procure goods and services in order to facilitate disaster response. So we found that just efficient and timely procurement of goods and services is really a huge part of disaster response and recovery. And we've been grateful for the collaboration of our procurement colleagues in helping develop toolkits and guidance notes to help facilitate, to help countries see how they can build stronger systems. Now, some of those tools to facilitate more effective procurement systems and response to disasters have included ideas for advanced planning of market research, sourcing strategies, putting in place framework agreements and memorandums of understanding to ensure that supplies are available. But we've also helped to support expedited procurement procedures and training programs that can be effectively implemented when needed. And through this variety of work, we've still also recognized that there are some, there have been some gaps, and that procurement can also be used to enhance social inclusion and assuring that growth, economic growth, is inclusive. And increasingly, governments have been considering how procurement of goods and services can advance gender equality and inclusive growth. In the United States, for example, there's been a long history in which the federal government has sought to award or set aside certain targets. For example, 5% of federal contracting specifically targeted toward women-owned businesses each year. And then to provide a level playing field for women businesses. Sometimes the government limits the competition for specific contracts to those businesses that participate in the women's contracting program. This work, I think, is perhaps a follow-on for some of the engagements we've already had in Grenada and St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines to help design more inclusive budget policies and more gender inclusive budget policies. And so we're delighted for participants from those countries who are here today. So again, I want to thank Manuela and our other procurement experts who are here today. And I hope that this is an active conversation today, really the beginning of a dialogue. I think the goal of the Caribbean Resilience Facility is really to provide capacity building. And so this is just an opportunity for you to see how some of these ideas and techniques and practices might be useful in your country, and then we would be happy to have follow-up discussions with you on how you might be able to apply it in your country context. So with that, let me pass it back to Urska, and thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bernard. I think this was beautiful and really kind of setting the stage for today's event. And you already mentioned that we have very much to thank Manuela for initiating this event. And Manuela will also start the presentation part of this webinar. So let me introduce you to Manuela. So Manuela Malo is a senior procurement specialist here at the World Bank, working in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. She's leading many of the engagement in the Caribbean in really kind of promoting public procurement reforms. She has been with the World Bank for almost a decade now, having previously worked as senior procurement officer with the government of Albania, where she's originally from. She's a lawyer by profession, but I think most importantly for today's session is that she's the author of the recently published publication on Towards Gender Responsive Procurement. This is how this publication looked like. We will also be posting a link to this publication in the chat. And as you will see in this publication, Manuela really provides kind of hands-on, very practical advice on how countries can mainstream gender in their public procurement activities. So really looking forward to your presentation, Manuela, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Orska. And let me do a kind of disclaimer here. I'm not the author. We have been a team working on it. So we really tried to bring here a lot of expertise and academic perspective, private sector perspective. So that's the work of the entire team, and of course, lead and guided by our practice manager, Diomedes Beroa. So it's a team job, and I'm looking forward now to see how we can further work together with the public sector and also the poverty team in expanding it, operationalizing the practice note. And we're trying to discuss today on how we can do it and how we can make it work in the Caribbean context. And I'm happy to see so many friends and colleagues from Caribbean region that are connected. I'm sure that the entire team is not new to them. We have been closely working for the country fiduciary review during the last year, and I'm happy to let you know that we will continue working together with you and trying to see what else we can do in Caribbean in terms of improving the PFM system, providing better social inclusion, and try to see how the public services can be of better use to the general public in Caribbean. I will try to share a presentation that is more or less trying to present the new project that we are about to start in the Caribbean, and trying to see what we are trying to do here, how we are, as Bernard said, how we will try to initiate the dialogue and to see how to make a more inclusive procurement in those countries when there is a setting when when we can make work together to make it ready, to have ready available procurement systems to incorporate that, and if not, what else is there to do that our other colleagues, poverty team and public sector, can take over and push forward into that direction. Can you see my screen?
We can see your slides, Manuela, but they're not full screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Okay. Yeah, here we go.
Okay. Can you see it in
Now we can see your notes on the site.
Okay, let me.
This is now full screen, just so you know.
Okay, so why and how the general public procurement community think that that use strategically procurement can integrate gender into it, and how we can contribute to equality in the governments. We really believe that the government have that purchasing power to integrate all horizontal policies and try to enforce those policies into the overall purchasing power of the government. It can also convey a lot of positive messages to the private sector into contributing to that. Especially now in the settings of the post-COVID-19 recovery and how all the economies are doing all over the world, we think that part of building back better of the countries could be really a more inclusive approach, trying to give the better half of the society chances to participate into the economy and use to the great extent the economic advantages of public spending. We saw, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, that the effects of the COVID-19 were disastrous, and unfortunately, women were the ones that suffered it the most. To the recent data, more than 4.5 million women are not yet re-entered into the job market. And we'll see that public procurement has a power, is a very good instrument to, first of all, empower women through providing more contracts to women-led businesses or women-owned enterprises. And for that, we'll try to use the context or how the UN women define women-led businesses and women-led enterprises, meaning that they will try to call women-led business any business that is chaired by a woman or woman-owned business, all businesses that when the woman has more than 51% of the shares. Now, with that, I'm sorry, I'm having some. Okay. With that, we also want to send the right messages that, like, is the public procurement the right approach? Because most of the countries are trying to address inequalities through other social laws, institutions, regulations, are trying to have other institutions being in charge of equality. So why public procurement is the main question here. And how can you make it work in the Caribbean context? How can you make it work in the countries that maybe they don't have the right tools and mechanism to that? And to all that question, why public procurement, we exactly will hear today, even from the countries like Canada or well-developed other countries, choose exactly public procurement and its power to integrate those social policies, especially in the context of having a sustainable public procurement. How we can make it work in the Caribbean context, that is exactly the question that we are laying here today, and we'll try in the next 1 year to respond together by trying to have a different level of interventions, awareness raising and capacity building programs to see that, yes, we can make it work even in the small countries context of Caribbean. And that we believe that it will have the great results. So we will, by this event, we'll try to launch a new project, as we mentioned, and as all my colleagues mentioned before, that will try to really address transforming social norms and increase the understanding of smart procurement, gender smart procurement, through working together with governmental officials, procurement practitioners, private sector, so we can see that there is an increase in knowledge and also a raised awareness. We will also hear today from Melanie, that is our contributor from Canada, the private sector perspective, and Melanie is representing Export Canada in that, and see, is the private sector ready to respond to this kind of new way of doing procurement, or are they dragged into this? If they're not ready, especially in a Caribbean context, what should we do better, and how can we work with them so they are fully prepared, and that doesn't come as a surprise to them, and they, in the meantime, develop the means, the tools, the instruments within their own organization to respond to these new requirements. And as I said, we will try also to expand our work that is already there, and having a lens on how can we use it under state of emergency procurement. That is very relevant to the country's context, considering the crisis after crisis that the region is going, especially from natural disasters, but then, of course, also this health crisis that kind of hit all the world. To see even in those contexts when we have difficulties in maintaining the right PFM standards, that exactly procurement can contribute. And I believe that there is also this report that you can already, I think you have already seen, but you can always consult, that is also prepared by the Canadian facilities in terms of demonstrating that women are significantly affected during a state of emergencies, and the response that the countries give to it, even during the crisis or even in the aftermath of it. So we will really try to work together to see how we can make sure that we have the gender lens even when countries procure under state of emergencies. So what we propose in terms of activities, what we are going to work together, and of course we're free here if you want to send your recommendations, propose changing some of those activities to fit your context, because you're the ground and you know better them. We are very open to see what else we can do beside them. But first of all, we will try to revise the gender practice note so it can fit to Caribbean context, meaning that it can fit to small countries with limited resources, with limited human capital. So it will not be an added burden to already overstretched procurement units in the countries. We will see how we can make it work in both ways, through the bank financing operations, working closely with the PIUs that we have in the region, but also working with, more importantly, with public procurement authorities, how you can mainstream it in the public procurement in your countries. And as mentioned, we will revise the note or add an annex if needed to especially tackle that kind of specific lens when it comes to response to emergencies, and what countries can do and have ready in the case that a crisis comes. So they do procurement also having in mind the other half of the society. And of course, we will try to prepare user-friendly training materials, videos, podcasts, anything that will help in that regard, that will not only be shared with you during workshops and capacity building events, but that will be available anytime in place that you can easily access, find, and try to absorb on your own. We will start our work, as said, with first doing our own homework, trying to revise the note on and make it fit to your environment, and then try to start with some series of training and capacity building events that will bring you the knowledge and also other country experience on how they embrace the gender smart procurement. We'll try to raise awareness in country level, also in regional level, and also try to see other stakeholders of public procurement, such as private sectors or other NGOs that are operating in the countries. And as I said, we'll try to see how we can make it work into a state of emergency and make it a good addition to the to the work that is already there for responding to the emergencies. The PDM, Urska helped me here. The toolkit that you already have, how the PFM can respond to the crisis and procurement and the state of emergency.
Yes, it's called Disaster Resilient and Responsive Public Financial Management Tool, and I'll actually share the link in the chat as well. Thanks, Manuela.
Great, yeah, because they put that long name, I could not remember, but you know what Urska is talking about. So this is how our practice note looks. We have it in English and Spanish, and that will be our base for shaping the dialogue together and trying to start making it happen in the Caribbean context. So I will briefly go through the notes so you can easily access and read it yourself. But basically, it's divided into two main parts. The first part talks about background and methodology, give you the all the right responses to the question, why public procurement? Are we already having, like throwing enough to public procurement? We asked this and that to be included into that, but yes, we will give you responses to all of that. And then the second part, that is exactly the toolkit, is a very practical tool that speaks to practitioners how to make it operational, how to understand the country, the institutional framework that are responsible for that, and how to integrate it upstream and downstream of the procurement cycle. So the first one, the methodology that set the ground for a good understanding, will provide you the aims and objectives of the guide. We will talk further that on the and have, like, I hope, a very interactive discussions when we will do the workshops and events in the Caribbean. It will also try to have a look. It tries to have a look also in the literature available out there, in the what other institutions are doing on that regard, what other countries are doing, and also try to give you the perspective of the stakeholder. In preparing the guidance note, we have tried to reach out to the public procurement agencies of the region, to NGOs, to private sector, commercial, chamber of commerce on the region, trying to also have their insight on it. So we will find a rich amount of information in that. And then we'll also talk about the limitation of this study, and also the limitation of some concepts in terms of gender, binary concepts, and how you can try to translate that into your context. So we said that why it's important, the gender integration into procurement. We extensively give a response throughout the note in terms of how it can integrate economic, social, political development into procurement, how you can channel the 7 to 15% of your GDP through public procurement and make it worth it to the other half of the population. We try to, through this note, to give a holistic approach. Usually when you hear about gender and procurement, you think only about women-led enterprises. It's not only to give contracts to this specific target of the population that may be already lucky enough to have a good standing in your economy. You'll see that we'll try also to include women as skilled and unskilled workers in the contract. We'll see how you can economically empower them through different measures that you can make apart from set-asides in providing contracts through public procurement. And it's the ways that public procurement can support them, it's infinite in terms of trying to set the right environment and gender-friendly environment within the private sector entities, how it can contribute to ending domestic violence by empowering women, economically empower women so they can break the cycle. So there are a lot of direct and indirect effects of including gender into public procurement. So we'll see the holistic approach. And then also we'll try to say to our procurement colleagues that there is no gender neutral procurement, but it's very true that it's a gender blind procurement happening out there, and we'll try to rewrite the story. So we will try to have the discussion with especially our Ministry of Finance colleagues, that they want to talk numbers and they want to see what is the economic rationale after that, and that it's worth pursuing this route. And as we say that public procurement goes up to 40% in the developing countries of the GDP, and translated into billions each year that go through public procurement. And you can see the immense economic power it can have into improving the life of some marginalized groups in your society. And of course, there's a positive correlation between gender equality and countries' GDP per capita. And it's also a smart economics in the way that by empowering women, you empower families, you empower generations to come. But I would leave all that talk to my Catherine Eliana, which is better placed to give you all the importance of why having the right equality in society matters. So the part 2, or the toolkit, or like I believe is the most important part of the practice note, really try to focus and guide you, especially procurement practitioners, into how it should be applied in and operationalized. And of course, we cannot just try to intervene in the procurement cycle. We'll try to do a lot of work upfront, try to understand the country, and we have indicators for that, what the country has in place in terms of what are the policies, the strategies it have, and what is the situation of gender there. And that's where you will also try to have a lot of dialogue with our gender colleagues that are look really deep into that in terms of what are the main issues that the country face and how public procurement can solve that. The second pillar, and we'll try to walk you through institutional framework, what the countries should, as a minimum, have in place so that you can make gender mainstreaming easy and applicable. What it should have in terms of the broader institutional framework, but also what it should have within the public procurement units and public procurement agencies. And that really emphasized the importance of having trained and knowledgeable procurement practitioners that know how to successfully do it without distorting the market, but with bringing the positive outcomes that we really try to push forward here. And the third one is when everything happens, that is the procurement cycle. We have 6 indicators that how to integrate them, starting from procurement planning to publishing, transparency, going towards a contract award, and then contract monitoring and measuring the results after the contract is already completed. We also give a lot of focus to the technology, digitalization of public procurement, because we really think that it enhances the transparency and opportunities that it can give to everyone, especially to small, medium enterprises that are led by women. And we'll see that countries that have a fully digitalized procurement systems score better in that regard and provides better opportunities. So we also think that having the right institutional framework with the right tools make it easier integrate gender into procurement. Okay, so we'll try to go like really quick into the pillars. So what do we mean by saying understanding the country? We'll try to see if the country has a gender strategy in place. We'll try to see if the legislative regulatory framework beyond procurement is supportive of that. We'll try to see if procurement legal framework is mature enough to really embrace that, and what can we do to support in that regard. The other pillar, that is institutional framework, policies, and structure, will try to see, as I said, the gender equality is integrated within the procurement entity. What can we do to support procurement practitioners into that? And if needed, to go deeper and try to draft with you a strategy on country level, we'll try to see the options on supporting you with that. It is very important, and it is also already kept in mind during our entire practice note, the monitoring and evaluation. We want to see and to measure results, to see the progress, and then make adjustment as it goes. We know it's a new thing out there, and it's not easy. So trying to measure progress, make adjustment when necessary, and then monitoring, having the set of indicators that will monitor the results and give meaningful impact. It's also provided for and will be explained in the training events. And I believe I will come to a conclusion to not get more time from my colleagues. Sorry if I kept it longer. It's important, and that's what our event is here today, because we want to have a clear dialogue between policymakers and procurement practitioners. The political will is very important into talking about gender mainstreaming into public procurement. I know it's not conventional, but it's the future. Sustainable procurement is the future of public procurement. We'll try to have the right setting a dialogue with the policymakers out there. So we will start working together on that. Then we'll try to see and how public procurement can try to add to what is already doing and complement in the country. We are not claiming exclusivity there. We'll try to see what's missing and what we can address by public procurement, and it's a message that it's very important to go through, that we try to complement what is missing. We don't forget what is the main purpose of public procurement, that is meeting the purchasing needs of the contracting authorities. We're just trying here to make it more inclusive. And we know that to have meaningful results, we should work more on behavioral change. Inequality starts from behaviors. We'll try to raise awareness, work into that. So it's a debate and also a conversation at the national level. So it needs to come from within, and we'll here just to support. With that, I will close it here. Thank you, everyone, and Urska, over to you.
Thank you very much, Manuela. And as you said, this is just the start of our proposed cooperation to work closely with governments in the Caribbean in mainstreaming gender in public procurement. So we're looking forward to connecting with the governments and trying to figure out what the best next steps would be. Manuela, I shared the link to the publication, right? But it seems there are some issues there that it's an internal document. So I did promise to the colleagues that we will share the PDF version of the document by email.
Yes, we can.
Straight after this. So with this, I want to turn over to Eliana. So Eliana Rubiano Matulevic is senior economist at the World Bank Parity Global Practice. She's also the regional gender coordinator for the Latin America and the Caribbean region, and really our go-to person whenever we need data on gender and gender inequalities in the region. She joined the bank in 2006. She's worked in different regions, so Latin America, Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East. But she's also been with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Central Bank of Colombia. And Eliana holds a PhD from the Maastricht University in the Netherlands, and master's degree in public administration from Columbia University in New York, and master's degree in economics from Universidad Javeriana in Bogota in Colombia. And in her presentation, Eliana will speak about gender equality in the Caribbean, but mostly how the data that she will be present can be used to think whether public procurement can be used to address some of those gender gaps. Thank you, Eliana, and over to you.
Thank you, Urska. Can you see my presentation now? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this BBL. It's a pleasure for me to be here, to hear from colleagues. My presentation focuses, as Urska was saying, on main gender gaps that we observe in the Caribbean region. I have two caveats. The first one is that data are very limited in the Caribbean. Of course, there is many things we can do. We're currently starting to work with specific governments to improve the availability of sex disaggregated data. But for now, what I'm presenting is what is available. So there are some limitations, and I will generalize in some cases, but please take into consideration that there is also a lot of variation when we refer to the Caribbean and in general in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. And the second caveat is that data are a bit outdated when I present, like for instance, the information on entrepreneurship, it's relatively old. So some things have changed in the past year, so just take that into consideration when listening to me. Without much further introduction, basically, I'm pretty sure I don't have to convince you that gender equality is important. Manuela already mentioned some of these. We know that there is a sustainable development goal focused on gender equality and women's empowerment. And we also know it's good from a rights perspective, but also from an economic perspective. There is evidence suggesting that gender equality promotes poverty reduction. It helps with economic growth, productivity. It also guarantees that institutions, the products that we developed, are more inclusive and representative of the whole society. And besides, it not only brings benefits for the individual, but also the society as a whole. And the World Bank is very committed to gender equality. We have an overall gender strategy that guides our analytics and operational engagement and so on. And we have translated those commitments into concrete actions with a regional gender action plan for Latin America and the Caribbean region. And basically, I'm sorry for the background noise, is my daughter. But basically what we have in the action plan is we're trying to improve the connection between the knowledge and analytics that we produce and specific actions in our operations. So we are committed to having each and every one of our operations in the portfolio, including at least one transformative gender action. So now let me get to the data. Basically here what I'm presenting is a summary measure, which is the Global Gender Gap Index produced by the World Economic Forum. And this is only for selected countries in the Caribbean, again, because of the lack of data. But what we see here, let's think of a race, right? If we have a race of 10 kilometers and at zero, where we are starting, basically we have no parity at all. So women and men outcomes are completely different, opposite directions. And then at the kilometer number 10, we have gender parity. We can see that on average, these countries are more or less at the 7 kilometer in the Caribbean, right? Not that bad, right? But there is work to do. And there is a lot of variation. When we look at the different dimensions of the index, again, it's a summary measure. We see that these countries have made a lot of progress in terms of health and education, but we see plenty of gaps in terms of access to economic opportunity and political empowerment and or decision making, right? So what do I mean by that? So if we take information pre-pandemic in the areas of health and education, where we see the most parity, let's put it that way, we see great improvements in terms of access and completion of primary education. Women's tertiary enrollment in many cases is quite high, even though in general tertiary enrollment rates tend to be low in Latin America and the Caribbean in general, with few exceptions. And in terms of health, we also see great improvements in most outcomes. But there are some specific persistent gaps and some reverse gender gaps that we are starting to see in some countries. In the case of the Caribbean, we see, for instance, in education, reverse gender gaps in terms of education, secondary education enrollment and completion. So what do I mean by that? That boys and young men are less likely than women to be in education. We also see that in general, learning outcomes are poor for both boys and girls, but in many countries, boys tend to perform worse than girls. And in terms of health, I think that the biggest issue on average, again, is high adolescent fertility rates, which obviously has implications for the individual and also for society, the intergenerational transmission of poverty and so on. When we turn to economic opportunity and sort of decision making, or what we call agency, we still have more issues there. And there is where we see a lot of opportunity with our operations to kind of continue contributing towards gender equality. So in terms of economic opportunity, we have seen that women on average in the Caribbean tend to have slightly higher participation rates in the labor market than other countries in the region. But still, when they do participate, their labor market outcomes in terms of earnings, for instance, tend to be lower than those of men. Let's put example of Jamaica, right? We see that women tend to have lower salaries on average than men, after controlling for education, family structures, and so on. But when we control for the number of hours that these individuals work, we actually see that the gender gap disappears. So what is that telling us? Basically telling us that there is not necessarily a differential in terms of what they earn, controlling for all these variables that I just mentioned, but in terms of the amount of time that they can dedicate to paid work. And this is pretty much related to amount of unpaid care work that women dedicate on a daily basis that does not allow them to participate more in the labor market. In terms of entrepreneurship, we see a lot of variation. Again, this data is quite outdated, but in some countries, we see that women are very well represented in firm ownership. In others, that's not the case. What we do know is that women tend to be overrepresented in low productivity sectors. And I'll get to that when I talk about the effects of the pandemic. Finally, in terms of agency, I think I mentioned this already, but women tend to be underrepresented in leadership. This is an area where we can do much more. And despite the fact that the legislation is in place to promote women's economic empowerment, reduce domestic violence, prevent domestic violence, and so on, there is always this disconnect with the implementation because it requires coordination between different sectors of the government. So that's a challenge that in general we see in the region, and it is also evident in the Caribbean. So I think my colleagues already mentioned this. There is high incidence of or prevalence of domestic violence for the countries for which we have data. So definitely an area where we do much more. And this is partly explained by gender norms about the different roles of women and men in society and what is allowed or accepted in society. I mean, these gaps in economic participation were already significant before the pandemic, but now what happened when COVID hit? Well, basically, women tend to be more present in those sectors that were most affected by the pandemic, such as tourism, personal services, accommodation, and so on. So what we see in many countries is that the gaps that already existed actually widened with the pandemic. And again, there is a lot of variation, but for most countries, that's what we are seeing. And we haven't seen a total recovery of employment, although there has been improvement, right? And as I just said, this is partly explained by the unequal distribution of domestic work. So the pandemic also came with increases in the number of sick people who needed care, schools closed, right? So women had to drop from the labor force to stay home and care for children. What is interesting here is that both women and men have reported increases in unpaid work at home and also in the help that they give to children for homeschooling. But those increases have always been higher for women than for men. So this unbalanced distribution of care tasks is still there. So to sum up, again, we see progress in many areas, but still challenges in others, particularly when it comes to the transition between education and the labor market. We have a huge agenda on reverse gender gaps in terms of education in specific countries in the region. And as my colleague Manuela was saying, procurement has the potential to contribute to women's economic empowerment, but it takes time. And I think we also heard from Bernard on this. It takes time and effort to get to the United States of the world, right? Where they have a very developed procurement system considering gender equality. I cannot emphasize the importance of making sure that investments take into consideration the whole cycle of public procurement. So making sure that the capacity is there, making sure that we understand specific gender needs and also the market structure, where is that women and men work, and so on. Connected to what I was saying, it's super important to consider stuff such as, okay, can we, through these tools, provide childcare, for instance? it's one of the key constraints for women to participate in economic opportunity. And also making sure that the basic things are in place, right? The requirements for equal pay certifications, equal pay between women and men for those that are doing the same type of work. We have plenty of resources, as my colleagues were saying. Win the Poverty GP, try to make sure that data informs the design of our operations. So you can access all these resources online. We have country gender scorecards for each of the countries in the Caribbean for which we were able to come up with a scorecard, policy notes on entrepreneurship, on the different issues that I just mentioned, and specific gender assessments. So stay tuned because we will have one for Jamaica, which will be published in the coming months. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for the opportunity and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Eliana. And thank you particularly for mentioning the issue of the lack of data, and particularly disaggregated data, which is definitely an issue in the Caribbean. And I noticed that Ms. Cointa Thomas, former permanent secretary at the Department of Finance in St. Lucia, mentioned that as an issue as well, because the lack of data that really kind of then hinders any work we want to do on whether making procurement more gender aware or budget policies in general. So I hope we have an opportunity at the end of the presentations to come back to this and just kind of figure out how we can address this. And with this, I want to turn over to Melanie so we can hear from the experience of Canada in integrating gender in public procurement. So Melanie Travers is the Director of Sourcing and Supplier Management at EDC, which stands for Export Development Canada. She is responsible for their procurement, vendor management functions. She's a chartered professional accountant with an MBA in accounting. As you'll see in her presentation, she's passionate about finance procurement transformation, including increasing diversity and inclusion in EDC's supply chain. And she's been working closely with different stakeholders to make sure that underserved markets, such as women-owned, minority-owned businesses, have the opportunity to grow and have access to new supply chains. So I think, Melanie, moving not just from addressing gender equality, but broader social inclusion gaps is something we're really excited to learn more about. So with this, over to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Urska. And I just wanted to do a time check because I want to make sure that our colleagues have sufficient time. So I have about 10 to 12 minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Urska. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today to speak about Export Development Canada's Supplier Diversity Program and discuss opportunities and challenges in implementing social procurement. With me, I'm joined today by Kelly Brown, who's our senior procurement advisor in our team and is also our supplier diversity champion in procurement at EDC. And I guess I just wanted to start by saying Export Development Canada, we're a federal crown agency of the Government of Canada. So we are held to similar obligations in our procurement team under the trade agreements as is the Government of Canada. So we have those constraints when we're looking to implement supplier diversity measures. But importantly, because I think the audience here is looking at, to considering, developing their own supplier diversity programs, I think it's important to note that we have not yet carved out, dedicated roles in our procurement team to support our supplier diversity program. We're quite early in the maturity of our program. It's been 2 years, but I just wanted to note that we have everything that you'll hear today has been done within the resources that we have within the procurement team, primarily Kelly and I. So why was it important for EDC to look at supplier diversity? Well, it was the decision to develop a supplier diversity program for us was an easy one. It's a very natural fit with EDC's mandate and our 10-year corporate strategy, which is to improve Canada's international trade with strong environmental, social, and governance principles at the core of everything we do. We also procure for our subsidiary, FinDev Canada, and their mandate is to support economic development in developing countries. So it also really aligns well with their mandate. Supplier diversity programs based on our benchmarking, provide the potential to help address economic inequalities by creating fair and accessible procurement processes. And as well, I think my previous colleagues that presented underlined this very well. And in doing so, that helps diverse suppliers to build their capacity. But it also helps buying organizations like EDC to lower it can be expected to help us to lower our operating costs and our supply chain risk, and at the same time potentially increase innovation. So it's really a win-win for both the buying organization, but also diverse suppliers. So what is a diverse supplier? Well, in Canada, the industry practice is an organization that's 51% or more owned and controlled by individuals who are either Indigenous, visible minority persons, persons with disabilities, women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, or veteran. So these are the main categories of diverse suppliers in the Canadian industry. So what is our supplier diversity program objective? As I mentioned, it's really primarily our main objective is about ensuring EDC's procurement processes are fair and accessible for diverse suppliers. So it's not really about providing additional points to diverse suppliers, although we can speak about that. That is something that we're looking to move towards in our public procurement processes. But it's really about just removing the barriers to procurement processes. Our procurement processes. And so what does that entail? Well, the tactics that we've been using to achieve this objective are to really, it's a lot of awareness and education of diverse suppliers. So building their understanding of the products and services that we offer and how that aligns, building our understanding of diverse suppliers and the products and services they offer and how that aligns to our needs. So getting to know diverse suppliers, but also educating them on procurement processes and how to participate, establishing procurement policy requirements, which we're beginning to do this year, and then creating more awareness for diverse suppliers of our upcoming competitive procurement processes. I'll be speaking to a lot of these points in a moment. And finally, identifying and removing any potential barriers in our procurement processes. So I'd say we've made good progress on most of these tactics on this slide. We have not yet begun to thoroughly, dive deep and explore what the barriers are that exist in our procurement processes, and that is a significant barrier for diverse suppliers. And so why I say that is what are those typical barriers that we've heard from diverse suppliers that they face in public procurement processes? What we know is that diverse suppliers are more likely to be small or micro companies, so they have less revenues, smaller number of employees, and they tend to be sole proprietorships or partnerships as opposed to corporations. And so what that means is that they face challenges in scaling their business, and they may find it challenging to meet the requirements laid out in our public request for proposals. They may also be unfamiliar with government procurement processes, how to do business with EDC, and how to find out about new opportunities. And finally, if they're new to, if they've recently founded their organizations, they may also be inexperienced in their sales pitches or business development practices. So in order to address these barriers, we've been one of the a number of the key sort of tactics we've used over the last couple of years since founding the program is that we regularly attend events in Canada to meet diverse suppliers. We've been doing that for the past 2 years to build their awareness of our procurement processes. We've also begun over the last 2 years to regularly share our requests for proposals with the certifying organizations, which I'll speak about in a moment. And they then share those with their members, and we have seen results as a result of those initiatives. And finally, we're planning to begin this year Meet the Buyer events, which is essentially an introduction of diverse suppliers with our internal buyers. But we will also be including feedback to suppliers on their pitches in this event. This will be the first event that we organize this year, led by EDC. So the certifying organizations that I mentioned, the corporate memberships that we have in place, there are a number of, these are the main advocacy organizations in Canada that certify suppliers as diverse. And why is that important to EDC? Well, it provides us with an assurance that the suppliers are indeed, 51% or more owned and controlled by one of the underrepresented groups. But there's more to these corporate membership, more benefit to these corporate memberships for a buying organization like EDC. This was one of the first steps that we took when we started to build our program in 2020. And it allowed us access to the list of diverse suppliers of these advocacy organizations so that we could verify that against our existing supplier database to see if we're already doing business with diverse suppliers, but also to begin attending the events that I mentioned and really get to know diverse suppliers. And then there's other benefits of these corporate memberships, such as coaching that they provide to us in building coaching and tools that they provide to us in as we build our supplier diversity programs. So they've been very critical in helping us to build our program. So the 6 organizations together advocate for businesses in the groups that I mentioned before, women-owned businesses, LGBTQ+, Indigenous persons, persons with disabilities, minorities, and veterans. So where did we start and where are we headed? As I mentioned, it's been 2 years since we, the idea of a supplier diversity first took shape. It was the end of 2019 when we started to turn our attention to this. And I would say most of 2020 was spent establishing the foundation for the program, as I like to call it. So one of the first steps was identifying a supplier diversity champion in our team, who's Kelly, who's joined us on the call today. But also, very transparently understanding what supplier diversity is, what is the definition of a diverse supplier, and then, understanding the benefits of the certifying organizations, those corporate memberships we had. We also, though, spent some effort to do benchmarking, and we learned that the US is sort of light years ahead of Canada. I think we're catching up as a country. But we did some international benchmarking of best practices in the market in order to, build our knowledge to inform the program design. In 2021, we continued to build out the program. So we confirmed an executive sponsor for the program, but we also updated our supplier registration process such that any new suppliers registering with EDC now can self-identify as being a member of one of these certifying organizations so that we can start to build our database of diverse suppliers. We started to receive the coaching from the certified organizations. We started to buy from diverse suppliers. It was during the pandemic. It was probably late 2020. We bought our first purchases from diverse suppliers would have been PPE, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. So we were really happy about that, and just start to get the word out and socialize the program internally at EDC so that internal buyers look to us for guidance in procurement, to point them to diverse suppliers. And we began to create that EDC database of diverse suppliers. This year, we're taking an important step that we're very excited about, which is to actually embed requirements in our procurement policy for diverse supplier procurement. So as an example, where we're a little bit more limited is in our public procurements. And I can speak about that if there's any questions in a little bit more depth, but where we have more flexibility is in the lower dollar value spend under $100,000 or even in the $100,000 to $600,000 range. And what we'll be embedding in our procurement policy this year is that buyers are required to request at least one out of the 3 proposals that they are required to obtain, that at least one of those be a diverse supplier, assuming that we're able to find the right diverse supplier for their needs. So we're really excited about that. We're also working to identify champions within each of our lines of business, sort of the next step in our maturity. And those folks will be sort of key stakeholders that we'll work with to build internal awareness of the importance of supplier diversity and identifying needs that we can then meet by identifying diverse suppliers that will meet their needs. And then, as I touched on briefly, we're beginning to consider how to include social procurement requirements into our public procurement requests for proposals. And I think one exciting thing that happened this year is the federal government of Canada came out with a social procurement policy and program. And we have recently met with them and understood that they are moving in that direction as well, where they'll be including up to 15% of a request for proposal. The weighting will provide points for diverse suppliers, certified diverse suppliers. So I think that's a very important move for the Government of Canada that will signal change to all of other government agencies like ourselves, and really leads the way. And so we're looking to do the same. So in 2023, what are we looking to do? Just further, continue to further mature the program. We've set ourselves some objectives, but they were quite, realistic of last year and this year, which was about sharing our request for proposals. But we want to further mature those metrics and targets, and start to really set, hard targets. In the future, I would see, working with our different senior leadership to even embed, supplier diversity into their performance assessments, potentially, obtaining funding to carve out, roles within procurement that are dedicated to this. This is what the more mature, the organizations that are more mature in their supplier diversity programs are doing. We're also going to be launching an internal and external webpage about our supplier diversity program, just to continue to build that momentum and awareness, and continue to then organize Meet the Buyer events, which is a key way to make connections between our internal buyers and diverse suppliers, because we do know that our internal buyers tend to be accustomed to working with certain vendors, and really one of the first hurdles is getting making those connections with our internal buyers, and then them getting experience working with those diverse suppliers and gaining confidence. So our key learnings to date, well, I think one of our first learnings was that really, even though I mentioned before that diverse suppliers tend to be small, micro, we did realize that the breadth of diverse suppliers really covers a broad set of industries and services. I mean, they really provide many different types of services, and they tend to be smaller organizations, but there are also some larger corporations in the membership. We also, most importantly, I would say, we learned it takes time to familiarize ourselves with the service offerings of the diverse suppliers and make those connections between internal buyers and the suppliers, and then also examine our procurement processes to identify and remove potential barriers. So I think when we embarked on this program design, we're still calling it a program, but we looked at it as a program that we would put in place with a beginning and an end. And now we very much more, our team looks at it more as a strategy, because rather it's an initiative that requires continuous attention. So this is a long-term investment, and it requires continuous attention. So it is more of a long-term endeavor. And then finally, just a little bit of some accomplishments to date since we put in place the program. Since announcing our intention to create more opportunities for equity-seeking businesses, we have begun to see some, small results as a result of increasing awareness of our public procurements. We've had 6 diverse suppliers submit proposals on those public procurements, and of those, 5 diverse suppliers qualified on our supplier arrangements. And we've also established more than $6 million in contracts with the diverse suppliers since 2021. I should caveat that some of those were existing diverse suppliers that we were already doing business with before we built the program. And then finally, I just want to end, Urska, by sharing, I think, like a really important message, which for me, I'd like to share with you, is that, I think coming back a little bit to what Bernard mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we are doing this off the side of our desks in addition to our day-to-day work, and it can seem like quite a overwhelming, and complex program to kick off and establish. And as I said in the beginning, I think we really looked at this as we need to implement everything, and from A to Z, and then we'll start to see results. But I think we very much more now understand that you start to see results incrementally right away. And so the message I want to share is just the sooner that you don't be overwhelmed by the size of it. You don't need to, implement everything in your supplier diversity program in the first 1 or 2 years. Just get started and you will start to see incremental change, and that's very rewarding for ourselves as a team, and I think for anyone involved in this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. And what an important message in starting and then slowly seeing the changes. But I think still it's so impressive that it was really, you and Kelly doing this and how far you got. So thank you very much for sharing this. And now we'll move to our last speaker. I know we have 15 minutes left, so I will have to ask you, Catalina, if you could make a presentation like 10 minutes long. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I do apologize for that. Catalina will be speaking in Spanish. So for those of you who don't speak Spanish or are not super fluent, we do have interpretation. So Teresa will be interpreting, and there's this globe button at the left bottom corner in Webex that you will need to press on to hear the interpretation. And with this, I want to introduce you to Catalina, who is currently the Deputy Director of who's currently the Deputy Director of the Directorate for Market Research and Strategic Sourcing in Colombia at their National Public Procurement Agency. She's leading there the development of guidelines, strategic inputs for all the entities working on market monitoring and data analytics programs. She was previously the Director of the Andy BRICS Sector Committee and external advisor to the Secretary of Economic Development of the Mayor's Office of Bogota. She's a lawyer by profession and holds a master's degree in government and public policy from Universidad Externado de Colombia. So over to you, Catalina.
Hi, nice to meet you. Do you see my presentation?
We do, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Muchas gracias por esta invitación. Como les dijeron, voy a hacer la presentación en español porque no me dijeron que la preparara en inglés, me excuso. Pero bueno, gracias a Dios tenemos traductor que les puede contar. Les voy a contar rápidamente porque sé que estamos contra el tiempo. Para nuestro país, el tema de género en la contratación pública ha sido punta de lanza de nuestra vicepresidenta Marta Lucía Ramírez. Y precisamente cuando el COVID llega, nos trazamos una hoja de ruta súper intensa desde la Agencia Nacional de Contratación Pública, Colombia Compra Eficiente, en ver cómo seguíamos cerrando esta brecha en un mercado tan importante como es la compra pública, en donde en nuestro país representa el 15% del Producto Interno Bruto. Rápidamente les cuento quiénes somos nosotros, cuál es el rol de la Agencia Nacional de Contratación Pública, y es desarrollar, nosotros somos el ente rector en materia de compra pública. Nosotros desarrollamos políticas públicas y herramientas orientadas a la organización y articulación de los partícipes en los procesos de compra. ¿Cómo lo hacemos? A través de nuestros instrumentos contractuales, como el uso de pliegos tipo, los acuerdos marcos de precios, emisión de circulares para disminuir precisamente la brecha de inequidad, por este caso específico, existente entre hombres y mujeres que marca a un país como el nuestro. Como lo contaron al comienzo, en efecto, Colombia ha sido reconocido a nivel de Latinoamérica como país pionero en el uso de best practices, como el uso de pliegos tipo, los acuerdos marco, cláusulas sociales diferenciales, para avanzar en todos estos temas diferentes que nos ocupa el día de hoy. Rápidamente les voy a contar lo más relevante que ha pasado en estos últimos 2-3 años. Expedimos la ley 2069 del 2020, por la cual se impulsa el emprendimiento colombiano. Esto es a raíz claramente de favorecer todo el tema de MIPYMES, los grupos sectoriales diferenciales, población diferencial. Y en uno de los artículos establecimos criterios diferenciales para emprendimientos y empresas de mujeres en el sistema de compra pública, para que en esos procesos competitivos tuvieran un puntaje diferencial y se incentivara su participación. Esto fue reglamentado y se establece claramente en el reglamento qué se entiende por empresa y emprendimiento, cómo se debe evaluar y demás. Adicionalmente, en los factores de desempate, le dimos factores diferenciales a mujeres víctimas de violencia intrafamiliar y mujeres cabeza de familia, y esto resulta obligatorio desde el 1 de enero del 2021. Todo esto se plasma, como les dije, a través de un decreto reglamentario donde los vuelve efectivos y de obligatorio cumplimiento para el Estado colombiano. Adicionalmente, es un instrumento contractual que ha sido, inclusive, como les comenté, calificado por el Banco Mundial en sus estudios como un best practice a nivel de la región, es el uso de los pliegos tipo. El uso de los pliegos tipo son de obligatorio cumplimiento para todas las entidades que usen, sean sometidas al Estatuto General de Contratación Pública de nuestro país. Y por eso en estos mismos habilitamos y condicionamos y estandarizamos estos requisitos habilitantes y factores de evaluación precisamente para evitarle la discrecionalidad a las entidades de hacerlos y se establecen desde la agencia, nosotros como ente rector. Para el caso, por ejemplo, de infraestructura de transporte y el sector de agua potable, donde se mueven muchos recursos en nuestro país, se estableció de manera obligatoria en las minutas contractuales que los contratistas contaran con un porcentaje mínimo de mujeres en la ejecución del contrato, logrando que esta promueva el acceso y participación igualitaria de mujeres en un mercado laboral que siempre había sido concebido o en la práctica lo ocupaban el sector masculino. Esto se vuelve obligatorio. Hoy el uso de los pliegos tipos ha sido maravilloso en el país, incrementando competitividad, participación y sobre todo generándole ahorros al Estado colombiano. También en el camino, comenzando con el apoyo de ONU Mujeres, de OCP, del Banco Mundial, del gobierno de UK, estuvimos trabajando en que muchas veces la normatividad no establece temas y el funcionario público, comprador público, debe establecer desde el estudio sectorial y el estudio de participación la inclusión de cláusulas sociales en contratos tendientes a promover la vinculación de un porcentaje mínimo de mujeres en la ejecución contractual para que se adopten acciones afirmativas en su condición de sujeto especial de protección constitucional que hoy nuestra legislación reconoce. Entonces nosotros en la agencia expedimos una circular, las circulares de la agencia son de obligatorio cumplimiento para las entidades públicas y a través de esto ya muchos gobiernos locales han establecido progresividad en la implementación y en el mercado laboral, en el incremento de la participación femenina del tema. Otro de nuestros instrumentos contractuales que ha sido reconocido como un best practice es el uso de acuerdos marco e instrumentos de agregación de demanda, donde agregamos demanda en bienes de características técnicas uniforme para la compra y bienes de servicios para el Estado colombiano. Actualmente, de 45 acuerdos e instrumentos que tenemos, en 28 tenemos reporte efectivo de participación de mujeres por más de 104.000 plazas copadas en el marco del mismo. Por ejemplo, tenemos 36.000 mujeres cabeza de familia trabajando dentro de los proveedores de estos acuerdos marco, donde ocupan el 36% también del mercado. Una brecha que tenemos que seguir trabajando mucho como país y que en tanto el sector público como el privado le está dando relevancia es tener a mujeres pertenecientes a asambleas, juntas de socios y a juntas directivas y a órganos sociales. Hoy en nuestros acuerdos marcos solo tenemos 2.900 mujeres. De estas empresas, solo el 0,1% son mujeres. Por eso, a través de política pública del Estado colombiano, estamos trabajando de la mano de muchas entidades para tratar de fortalecer y subir la participación de mujeres en órganos sociales y colectivos. También estamos, ustedes saben que nuestro país ha sido claramente víctima del conflicto armado y desde la agencia incluimos cláusulas e incentivos a víctimas, mujeres del conflicto armado y desmovilizado para que tengan esa oportunidad de acceder al mercado de compras públicas. Como les conté, cuando llegó el COVID, tuvimos, como todos los países, desafíos y retos importantísimos y nosotros logramos en un tiempo récord hacer un acuerdo marco, perdón, un instrumento de agregación de demanda para temas relacionados con la compra de emergencia durante el COVID-19, el cual va a estar vigente hasta este 30 de junio, que se acaba la emergencia sanitaria en nuestro país. Este ha sido el contrato estatal con mayores proveedores en la historia del país y podemos reportar satisfactoriamente que tuvo más de 37,000 mujeres contratadas dentro de estas empresas trabajando para este instrumento contractual. ¿Qué nos arrojan nuestros datos hoy del sistema de compra? Nosotros desde la agencia hacemos un monitoreo permanente al comportamiento y la progresividad de la mujer para mirar cómo debemos afinar esta política pública y darle mayor relevancia. Y pueden observar en la pantalla que la proporción de contratación de mujeres antes era menor al 50% y desde el 2019, con todas estas acciones incluidas, hemos logrado subirla al 52.67% dentro del mercado de compra pública en contratos de prestación de servicios, que es una modalidad que utilizamos mucho en nuestro país para suplir todas las necesidades del Estado colombiano. En general, entre los años 2018 y 2021, la proporción de contratación de mujeres con los honorarios más bajitos, que es entre 1 y 4 millones, es decir, alrededor de $1,000 a $2,000, la participación de mujeres es del 52%. También en este estudio de monitoreo que hacemos de manera permanente lo miramos cómo se está comportando a nivel región. Nuestro país tiene 32 departamentos a lo largo y ancho donde todos y cada uno tiene diversidades y condiciones diferentes. Y podemos observar de manera satisfactoria que en la gran mayoría hay participación mayoritaria de mujeres, salvo en el caso de 5 departamentos que claramente tendremos que enfocar la política a suplir y a mirar qué está pasando y seguir trabajando en el cierre de brechas. Así como también el tema de salarios y de honorarios es otra brecha que tenemos que entrar a cerrar. ¿Por qué hablo de los honorarios? Porque si uno mira al costado izquierdo de la pantalla, los honorarios más bajitos, en efecto tenemos paridad de promedio de honorarios entre hombres y mujeres, pero cuando lo analizamos de salarios más altos, hay mucha mayor participación en hombres que en mujeres. Entonces, hay que seguir trabajando en pro del cierre de esta brecha. En este monitoreo que hacemos también de manera permanente de cómo se comporta el sistema de compras públicas, miramos la participación de las mujeres por sectores de la economía colombiana. Entonces, ¿qué podemos observar? Que un mercado, por ejemplo, que no pensaríamos que tiene muchas mujeres, el sector defensa, hoy alberga el 68% de ellas en su trabajo. Lo mismo que un mercado natural, que es el de la inclusión social, así como el de ciencia y tecnología. ¿Qué retos tenemos como país y como agencia? Como les dije, seguir trabajando en pro de cerrar la brecha de honorarios, que esta paridad en los salarios más bajos se siga viendo en los salarios más altos. En departamentos que se reportan, mirar qué pueda estar pasando. Pero lo que podemos decir es que a nivel general esta brecha no se ha reducido en los últimos 4 años, por ende claramente tenemos que encontrar acciones afirmativas y de política para seguir trabajando. Nosotros tenemos este visualizador en el que les mostramos, que por temas de tiempo no les voy a dar, no se los voy a mostrar porque les habíamos preparado un video, pero les dejo el link del mismo, donde se puede ver el comportamiento del sistema de compras por género en nuestro país. Ahí en el QR pueden encontrar el acceso al mismo y se puede mirar el comparativo regional, la proporción por género, los sectores y los honorarios también por género. Y bueno, con esto quería contarles rápidamente cómo hemos avanzado en nuestro país y que el gobierno colombiano que estamos ya a puertas, además, tenemos elecciones el domingo. En este gobierno, nuestro presidente Iván Duque Márquez, y liderado por nuestra vicepresidenta, estuvimos trabajando en pro del cierre de estas brechas y estoy segura que el gobierno entrante seguirá trabajando por lo mismo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so very much, Catalina. I mean, there's no wonder that Colombia is, so often mentioned as the front runner of these. And I mean, the tools you're using to promote gender equality, standard documents, framework agreements, requirement to give a certain percentage of contracts to women-owned businesses, I think very, very impressive. So thank you for sharing your story with us. It's super unfortunate that we're running out of time. So I hope participants can still stay around a few more minutes, because I mean, we did get a question on disaggregated data, and I just think it's so crucial to thinking about integrating gender in public procurement, or, for example, the work we're doing on gender budgeting, thinking about how budget policies can impact men and women, different segments of the population. And, Ms. Thomas rightly pointed out in her chat comment that sometimes, the problem with the lack of data is really what prevents us to kind of moving forward and doing perhaps some more impactful work on whether public procurement or budgeting. So any advice you would have? I mean, all four of you showed us these different charts, great data in your presentations. But what do we do when we don't have enough data? How can we still move ahead and think how we can mainstream gender in procurement? I don't know, Manuela, if you want to start with that question, and can I ask, we can do each of you in 30 seconds. I know I'm asking a lot, but
absolutely.
we can do it either way.
Is everyone listening? Because I see a comment that saying that Urska was muted. So maybe among our panelists, we can listen to each other. But
actually, what participants have to do is go back to the globe function and stop using the interpretation channel. I'll write that in the chat.
Okay, great. No, that's super important, and that's what also is one of the limitations of the gender node that we are also mentioning there. As I said, digitalization, public e-procurement will give us enough data to exactly know where to intervene, how to intervene. We are already working with the countries like St. Lucia, for example, and try to make the e-procurement mandatory, so we will have enough reliable data. But even in the countries that didn't have enough, we'll try to work and collect data manually to come to the results on the gender representation into public procurement. So I think there are modalities. We can work with the countries, which of this option is better for them. But of course, digitalization is the key message here in terms of data. Thanks.
Eliana, do you want to go next? You're muted. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, Urska already stated, obviously, digitalization, I think that's the way to go. From the perspective of the poverty economist, definitely we need to fill gender data gaps, starting from the basics. Obviously, procurement is very specific, but we have needs at a higher level, right? So continuing to collect information through household surveys, enterprise surveys, and so on. Some of this information can be included probably in the enterprise surveys. And we have a project that was recently approved in the OECS, and hopefully that will help us narrow some of these gender data gaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eliana. And Melanie, if you want to take this question as well, plus you also received a comment on your presentation. I think those participants really appreciated the good story you shared. And we're also asking if, like, how can we take, your experiences to the Caribbean region and try to think how we can also build capacity in the private sector. And I mean, these two questions are not necessarily related, although probably having a good understanding based on the data of who our diversity supplier probably also helps. Over to you, Melanie.
And sorry, Urska, I might have missed the last part of your question because I was trying to unmute myself, but just to speak to the data point, I would say that wasn't a significant hurdle for us in terms of getting the buy-in at EDC to move forward with the program. We already had, quite a bit of data in the market, and I think intuitively we knew that without even pulling the numbers of our existing supplier base, that we tend to do business with the larger, consulting firms, like the well-known vendors, and that we probably didn't have a lot of representation in our diverse supplier database. In our diverse supplier base, although, working with those certifying organizations allowed us to do that mapping and identify 12 that we were already working with. So we knew we had a long ways to go, and we had the buy-in at the executive level. So the second part of the question, Urska, was around our program.
It was actually a comment on your presentation. I think people really appreciated, the approach you've taken, but we're also wondering, if there's how do you build capacity in the private sector as well among diverse suppliers to be able to be part of the public procurement? I mean, being part of the tender.
Yeah, and that is the next, in all transparency, that is the next big challenge that we need to address. That's what I was referring to when I said we haven't really dug into kind of the barriers in our existing procurement processes. And we are starting to move in that direction by, obtaining a legal opinion on what we can build into our requirements of our request for proposals. But, I would see us doing further consultations with diverse suppliers about other, beyond the requirements, what are the other barriers that they encounter when responding to public procurements. It could be, just having the arms and legs, like the employees internally, to prepare large bids. So I think that's something that we plan to dive into in more detail and sort of understand what we can remove in terms of barriers.
Thank you, Melanie. And then last but not least, Catalina, back to the issue of data. I mean, based on your presentation, it doesn't seem that having data and gender desegregated data is an issue in Colombia. But if it is, how did you overcome it? And where are you getting all the data on which you're basing a lot of policy decisions?
Urska, te contesto súper rápido. Los datos siempre serán el desafío más importante en el tema de la analítica, porque la calidad del mismo depende claramente del comprador que los diligencia. En Colombia hemos trabajado muy fuertemente desde la agencia, creando un grupo de analítica de datos precisamente para la depuración del mismo y migrando todo el país a plataformas transaccionales que permitan capturar información estructurada y no permitirle a la gente diligenciarla de manera. Adicionalmente, también en la región ya adoptamos el estándar de datos en OCDS para poder compararlos a futuro con el resto de países y tenemos tableros abiertos para que puedan hacer. Somos un gobierno abierto con toda la información a disposición y al alcance de todos, pero la cultura del dato es una cultura que se va haciendo de manera progresiva. Vamos en camino, nos falta mucho, pero gracias a Dios y afortunadamente contamos con muy buena información.
Super. Thank you, Catalina. As I said, it's really unfortunate that we're running out of time. It's just such an exciting topic, I think. So just my last question, whoever wants to take it, for those out there who still don't think that public procurement is necessarily the right tool for governments, to address gender gaps, because, it should be more about the value for money. What would you say? What's the main argument? Why should we be using public procurement to close gender gaps? If any of you wants to take this one.
Well, maybe I could take a stab at that, Urska. I think my response to that would be it is always about value for money, but what the focus of these programs is to remove those barriers. We know those barriers are there for diverse suppliers, and we can see it in the data. And so it will always be about sort of the best fit with our needs and value for money. But, it's about giving a level playing field to diverse suppliers.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't know if Catalina, Manuela, you also wanted to come in on this?
No, thanks. I think that already Melanie.
En efecto.
Yes, please, Catalina.
En efecto, nosotros en Colombia estamos incorporando metodologías para el sector público de abastecimiento estratégico para generar ese mayor valor por dinero y esas eficiencias públicas, teniendo en cuenta el porcentaje tan importante que representa la compra pública para el Producto Interno Bruto colombiano. Esas buenas prácticas del sector privado, que hoy generalmente la maneja oil y gas, las queremos replicar y estamos en todo el proceso de incorporación de política pública porque sabemos que la compra pública es un motor de crecimiento de la economía y de participación, sobre todo en un país con regiones tan diversas como el nuestro.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers, to Bernard, to Catalina, to Eliana, to Maniola, to Melanie, to Teresa for translating, Ravenna for helping with the organization. We really appreciate it. And as we said, we're hoping this is just the start, right? Getting everyone excited about the responsive procurement. And as part of the World Bank-led Canada Caribbean Resilience Facility, we're really looking forward to continued engagements on this with governments. So please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you very much to all the participants for joining. And with this, I want to end today's session. Wish everyone good rest of the Friday and have a beautiful, wonderful weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Maniola.